My wife cheated with her coworker while I worked shifts to pay her debts, so I filed for divorce, took everything and never looked back. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for most of my marriage, I genuinely believed being a good husband meant carrying the weight quietly and without complaint. I thought love was proven through endurance, through showing up tired, stressed, and still saying, "I've got this." When I met my wife, she was drowning in credit card debt, personal loans, and overdue bills that seemed to follow her like a shadow. She told me about it on our third date, her voice shaky, eyes glossy, saying, "I just need one chance to start over." I remember reaching across the table, squeezing her hand, and saying, "We'll figure it out together." Back then, it felt noble. Necessary. Almost romantic. I stepped into the provider role without even realizing it was happening. I told myself that stability was love, that protection was love, that being the strong one was what husbands were supposed to do. When the bills piled up, I picked up night shifts. When that wasn't enough, I added weekend overtime. When my body started feeling permanently sore, I took on freelance work after midnight, sitting at the kitchen table while she slept. The house was always quiet at that hour, just the hum of the fridge and the glow of my laptop screen. She'd wake up sometimes and pad into the kitchen, wrap her arms around me, and whisper, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Other times she'd say, "Once this debt is gone, our real life will finally start." I held on to those words like a finish line. I imagined vacations we hadn't taken, weekends we'd get back, a version of us that wasn't always exhausted. But slowly, without realizing it, my entire identity became about fixing things. Paying things off. Holding everything together. I stopped asking myself how I felt because there was always another payment due, another shift to cover. I told myself this was temporary. That love required sacrifice. I didn't know then that every extra hour I worked, every dollar I sent toward her past mistakes, was quietly buying something I never agreed to pay for, and that the future I thought I was saving was already slipping out of my hands. By the time we settled into married life, exhaustion wasn't an occasional feeling anymore, it was the background noise of my existence. My days blurred together into a cycle of alarms, shifts, caffeine, and silence. I'd come home after midnight smelling like grease and stale coffee, shoes heavy with fatigue, shoulders permanently tight. Most nights, she'd already be asleep, curled toward the edge of the bed, phone face down on the nightstand. I'd slide in carefully, trying not to wake her, telling myself this was just the price of building something real. When she got a job at a new company, I was genuinely proud of her. I remember saying, "This is good. You're finally catching a break." She smiled wide and said, "Yeah, my coworkers are amazing. It actually feels nice to be appreciated." That word, appreciated, stuck with me, even though I didn't know why at the time. She started mentioning after-work dinners, team drinks, long meetings that ran late. "It's just work stuff," she'd say casually, shrugging as she kicked off her shoes. "You know how it is." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Some nights I'd heat up leftovers alone, sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through emails for freelance jobs, while the clock crept past 10. Other nights she'd come home buzzing with energy, talking fast about office drama, inside jokes I wasn't part of, names I couldn't keep straight. When I tried to share my day, she'd nod distractedly, eyes flicking to her phone. "Sorry, I'm just tired," she'd say, even though I was the one running on fumes. I started telling myself that this was normal. That marriages go through phases. That once the debts were gone, we'd reconnect. Still, something felt off. She laughed more, but not with me. She dressed nicer for work, lingered longer in the mirror, and suddenly guarded her phone like it contained state secrets. When I asked if everything was okay, she kissed my cheek and said, "You worry too much." So I stopped asking. I focused on working harder, fixing faster, pushing through. Because if I slowed down, if I really looked at what was changing, I was afraid of what I might see. And deep down, a quiet voice I kept ignoring started to wonder if the life I was killing myself to support was already moving forward, just without me in it. By the time her debts were almost gone, I expected to feel relief. That was the deal I'd made with myself, the light at the end of the tunnel I kept chasing through sleepless nights and aching joints. And technically, it was working. Credit cards closed. Loan balances hit zero. Collection calls stopped. On paper, we were finally stable. But emotionally, it felt like I was living with a stranger who just happened to share my last name. She was different in ways I couldn't quite explain at first. Less affectionate. Less patient. When I came home late, she didn't ask how my shift went anymore. She'd be on the couch scrolling, barely looking up as she said, "Hey." If I tried to hug her, she stiffened for a second before relaxing, like she had to remind herself to let me in. I told myself I was imagining things. That stress changes people. That this was temporary. Her phone, though, became a problem I couldn't ignore. It was always face down. Always on silent. If a notification popped up, she'd grab it instantly, thumbs moving fast, then glance at me like she was checking whether I noticed. Once, I joked, "You guarding state secrets over there?" She snapped back, "Why are you always watching me?" The sharpness in her voice caught me off guard. I apologized immediately, even though I hadn't meant anything by it. I started blaming myself. I thought maybe I'd worked too much. Maybe I'd become boring. She'd sigh and say things like, "You're never really here anymore," while I stood there in my work clothes, dead tired, wondering how much more here I could possibly be. When I reminded her why I was working so much, she'd roll her eyes and say, I know. I'm just saying how I feel." But her feelings never seemed to include me anymore. At night, lying beside her, I'd replay old conversations in my head, trying to pinpoint when we stopped feeling like a team. I was funding our future, or so I thought, yet somehow I felt more alone than I ever had before. And the worst part was this growing, sinking realization I didn't want to admit out loud, that while I was busy paying off her past, she was quietly building a present that didn't need me at all. The first time she mentioned him, it was casual enough that I barely registered it. We were eating dinner, something quick and forgettable, and she said, "Oh, Mark from work said the same thing today." I asked who Mark was, not suspicious, just curious. She shrugged and said, "Just a coworker. He sits a few desks over." The way she said just felt rehearsed, like she'd already decided how that sentence should sound. After that, his name started slipping into conversations more often. "Mark thinks this project is going to get messy." Mark had the funniest reaction in the meeting today. She laughed when she talked about him, a lightness I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. I tried to tell myself I was being sensitive. People are allowed to have friends. Especially at work. I didn't want to be that husband, the jealous, insecure one who polices harmless interactions. One night, while we were folding laundry, I asked, "So, is Mark married or something?" I kept my tone neutral, casual. She didn't even look up. "Yeah, I think so. Or maybe engaged." "Why?" The answer came too fast. Too smooth. "No reason," I said, even though my chest felt tight. She shot me a look and added, "You don't need to worry. He's just easy to talk to." That stung more than I expected. Soon, she started comparing us without realizing it. "Mark listens better," she said once, laughing like it was a joke. Another time, frustrated, she snapped, "At least he understands what work stress is like." I wanted to scream that I worked myself half to death for us, but instead I swallowed it. I didn't want to push her further away. Still, something in my gut wouldn't settle. The way she smiled at her phone after work dinners. The way she mentioned him when she was upset, like his opinion mattered more than mine. Every instinct in me was telling me something wasn't right. But I ignored it. Because I trusted her. Because I loved her. And because admitting the truth would mean accepting that the man she told me not to worry about was already standing between us, slowly taking up more space than I ever realized. The first real crack came on a night I hadn't planned to notice anything at all. I came home earlier than usual, my shift cut short, my body buzzing with that rare feeling of having a little extra time. She was in the shower, steam fogging up the bathroom mirror, her phone sitting on the kitchen counter where she must have left it in a rush. I wasn't snooping. I didn't even touch it at first. Then the screen lit up. A message preview flashed across the lock screen. I wish today didn't have to end. My stomach dropped. I stood there staring at the words like they were written in another language, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sound of the shower. I didn't open the message. I didn't scroll. I just stared, trying to convince myself there was some innocent explanation. Coworkers vent. Friends joke. I was tired. I was paranoid. By the time she walked out wrapped in a towel, I'd already decided to play it calm. "Hey," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Someone texted you while you were in the shower." She froze for half a second. Just long enough for me to notice. "Oh," she said casually. "Yeah. From work, I guess." Her eyes sharpened. "Why were you looking at my phone?" That's when everything shifted. I tried to explain myself, to tell her it just popped up, that I wasn't accusing her of anything. She didn't let me finish. "You're always suspicious lately," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how exhausting that is?" Suddenly I was the problem. I was controlling. I was insecure. She threw my long hours back at me like a weapon. "You're never around, and when you are, you're interrogating me." I apologized. I actually apologized, standing there in my work clothes, feeling stupid and small. She sighed dramatically and said, "I can't deal with this right now," then locked herself in the bedroom. I slept on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the message in my head. I told myself I'd overreacted. That I'd almost ruined everything by doubting her. But deep down, beneath the guilt and self-blame, something else was growing, quiet, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Because innocent messages don't sound like that. And innocent people don't react with that much anger when they're caught off guard. I didn't go looking for the truth. That's what still messes with my head the most. I wasn't digging through her phone or tracking her movements like some paranoid detective. The truth slipped out on its own, careless and unplanned, like it got tired of hiding. It happened on a weekday afternoon when I stopped by her office to surprise her with lunch. I hadn't done that in months, mostly because my schedule never lined up, but that day I had a rare window. I remember standing in the lobby, holding a paper bag with her favorite sandwich, feeling oddly nervous. When I asked the receptionist if she was available, the woman hesitated. "Oh, she stepped out with Mark," she said. "They went across the street. Shouldn't be long." My chest tightened at the way she said his name, familiar, casual. I waited near the window, watching people pass by outside. Then I saw them. My wife and Mark, walking side by side, close enough that their arms brushed. She was laughing. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. The kind I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. He leaned in and said something, and she touched his arm as they walked. It was small. Subtle. But it landed like a punch to the gut. When she saw me, her smile vanished instantly. "What are you doing here?" she asked, too quickly. "I brought you lunch," I said, holding up the bag like it suddenly weighed 100 pounds. Mark mumbled something about a meeting and disappeared without even looking at me. On the drive home, the silence was unbearable. Finally, I said, "Are you having an affair?" The words tasted metallic in my mouth. She stared out the window for a long moment before saying, "It's not like that." Then came the explanation. Or what she wanted me to believe was one. "We just connect emotionally. You've been gone so much. I needed someone to talk to." Emotionally. That word echoed in my head. She swore nothing physical had happened. She cried. She blamed stress. She blamed loneliness. And somehow, by the end of the conversation, I was comforting her. But something inside me had shifted permanently. Because even if she was telling the truth, and part of me already knew she wasn't, there was no version of this where I wasn't being replaced. That was the moment I realized the marriage I thought I was fighting for had already changed into something I didn't recognize. and the worst part was knowing this still wasn't the full truth. After that conversation, something in me went quiet. Not calm, numb. I stopped pushing for answers because every question somehow turned into an accusation against me. Whenever I brought up Mark, her tone hardened immediately. "I already told you, nothing happened," she'd say, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Why can't you just drop it?" So I did. At least on the surface. Inside, I was unraveling. She rewrote the story of our marriage like she'd rehearsed it. According to her, she hadn't betrayed me, I'd abandoned her emotionally. "You chose work over me," she said one night, pacing the living room. I was lonely. What did you expect? I wanted to scream that I was working to pay her debts, that every hour away from home had been for us. Instead, I just stood there, jaw clenched, feeling like I was watching my life get rewritten without my consent. Mark's name didn't disappear. It just changed context. He says I deserve to be happy. He actually listens. He understands me in ways you don't. Each sentence landed like a quiet insult, but if I reacted, she accused me of being defensive. If I stayed silent, she took it as proof that she was right. There was no winning. No version of reality where my sacrifices mattered. So I started watching instead of talking. I noticed how her stories didn't line up. How timelines shifted. How late nights became later, excuses thinner. I began keeping track of dates, screenshots, bank statements, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed proof I wasn't losing my mind. I wrote things down in the Notes app on my phone, my hands shaking as I typed. It felt surreal, documenting my own marriage like a crime scene. Meanwhile, she grew bolder. Less careful. More convinced I'd never leave. She'd sigh and say, "You're not going anywhere. You need me." That sentence echoed in my head long after she said it. Because she believed it. She truly believed I was too exhausted, too invested, too weak to walk away. And maybe she was right, at least back then. Because even as the lies got louder, even as my trust evaporated, I was still clinging to the idea that if I just stayed quiet long enough, the truth wouldn't hurt as much when it finally surfaced. Rock bottom didn't come with a dramatic confrontation or a screaming match. It came quietly, on a night when I was too tired to even be angry anymore. I'd finished a double shift and got home close to 2 a.m., my body aching in that deep, hollow way that sleep never fully fixes. The house was dark except for the soft glow coming from the bedroom. I knew before I opened the door that something was wrong. She wasn't asleep. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in her hands, smiling at the screen in a way she never smiled at me anymore. When she saw me, she didn't jump or hide it. She just sighed, annoyed. "You're home early," she said, like I'd interrupted something important. That alone made my chest tighten. I don't know why I asked again. Maybe I needed to hear it out loud. "Are you still talking to him?" I said. My voice cracked despite my best effort to keep it steady. She didn't deny it this time. She rolled her eyes and said, "Yes. And before you start, you pushed me to this." That was the moment something inside me collapsed. She admitted it then, finally. Not all at once, not with remorse. Bit by bit. They'd kissed. Then it was more than kissing. Then it was a few times. She said it like she was listing errands. When I asked how long, she shrugged. Does it really matter? I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down on the floor. I remember saying, "I was working myself sick for us." She snapped back instantly, "You chose that. I didn't ask you to." That sentence did more damage than the affair itself. Because in that moment, I understood that every sacrifice I'd made meant nothing to her. I left the house that night and sat in my car in the parking lot until sunrise, staring at the steering wheel, replaying everything. The lies. The gaslighting. The years I couldn't get back. I felt empty, humiliated, and completely disposable. That was the lowest point of my life, the moment I realized I could give someone everything and still be treated like I was the problem. And as the sun came up, a terrifying thought settled in: if this was rock bottom, then whatever came next would change everything. Something shifted after that night. Not in a dramatic, movie montage way, but in a cold, deliberate way that scared me a little once I noticed it. The anger burned itself out quickly, leaving behind a calm so unnatural it felt wrong. I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying to understand her. And for the first time since we'd met, I started thinking in terms of me instead of us. I didn't tell her I was planning anything. On the outside, I looked the same, still working, still coming home late, still quiet. She mistook my silence for defeat. "See," she said once, smirking slightly. "You're finally learning not to overthink." I nodded and said nothing, even as my hands curled into fists in my pockets. Behind the scenes, I moved carefully. I opened a separate bank account and redirected my paycheck. I gathered statements, screenshots, emails, every financial record, every suspicious message I could legally access. I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney on my lunch break, sitting in my car afterward with my heart racing as if I had just committed a crime. The lawyer listened calmly, flipping through my documents, then looked up and said, "You've been financially carrying this marriage. That matters." Those words stayed with me. At home, she grew careless. She stayed out later. Took phone calls on the balcony. Stopped pretending she was sorry. She talked about needing space and finding herself, all while spending my money like nothing had changed. The man she cheated with faded in and out of the picture, but I stopped tracking him emotionally. He didn't matter anymore. She didn't notice the shift in me, or maybe she didn't believe it was real. One night, she said casually, "You'll never actually leave. You're too invested." I looked at her and almost laughed. She had no idea that every day she underestimated me was another brick laid in my exit. I was done pleading. Done explaining. Done trying to earn loyalty from someone who saw my exhaustion as weakness. I didn't want a fight or a dramatic blow-up. I wanted out, clean, quiet, and final. And as I finalized the last pieces of my plan, I knew the next step would be the one she never saw coming. The day she was served the divorce papers didn't look dramatic from the outside. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just a quiet afternoon that shattered the world she thought she had control over. I wasn't home when it happened. I planned it that way. My lawyer had warned me, "You don't need to be there for the fallout." I didn't realize how right he was. When I got home that evening, the house felt different, heavy, like the air itself was waiting. She was sitting at the kitchen table, the envelope spread open in front of her, hands shaking. Her face wasn't angry yet. It was panicked. "What is this?" she demanded the moment she saw me, voice already cracking. I set my keys down slowly and said, "It's a divorce filing." The words felt strange in my mouth, but solid. "Real." She laughed at first. A short, disbelieving sound. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. Her expression shifted instantly, from disbelief to fury. "After everything I've been through? After everything I've told you?" She paced the room, clutching the papers like they were an insult. "You're really going to do this to me?" That's when the reality started sinking in. She flipped through the pages, eyes scanning numbers, names, dates. Her voice got quieter. "Wait, what do you mean the debts are mine?" she asked, suddenly unsure. I explained calmly that the accounts were in her name, that my lawyer had made sure of it. The safety net she thought would always be there was gone. That's when the calls started. Apologies. Tears. Promises to cut him off. She even mentioned Mark, saying he'd help her through this. But by the end of the week, his name disappeared from her mouth completely. Responsibility has a way of making people vanish. She begged. She blamed. She threatened. None of it worked. Because for the first time, I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't fixing. I wasn't sacrificing. I was done. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something that felt almost unreal. the hardest part was over. And the woman who thought I'd never leave was finally starting to understand just how wrong she'd been. The divorce didn't drag out the way she expected it to. I think she assumed I'd cave the moment things got uncomfortable, that I'd start negotiating out of guilt or nostalgia. Instead, I stayed silent and let the process do what it was designed to do. Every time she reached out, sometimes crying, sometimes furious, I routed it through my lawyer. The more she realized I wasn't engaging, the more frantic she became. She tried every angle. One week she was apologetic. "I made a mistake," she said over the phone, voice trembling. "I was lost. You were my safety." The next week she was cruel. "You're heartless," she spat in a text. "You're ruining my life." I read every message with a strange detachment, like they were coming from someone I used to know. Because the truth was, I didn't recognize her anymore, or maybe I finally saw her clearly. Financially, everything unraveled for her fast. Without my income propping things up, reality hit hard. Payments she'd ignored resurfaced. Cards got declined. She tried to argue that I owed her support after everything she'd endured. The judge didn't agree. The documentation mattered. The paper trail mattered. Years of quiet responsibility suddenly had weight. I walked away with my savings intact, my income protected, and my peace slowly returning. She lost the apartment. The coworker she'd risked everything for never showed up once things got real. Friends who once sided with her stopped calling when the story stopped sounding romantic. The strangest part was how calm I felt. No celebration. No victory speech. Just relief. I stopped waking up with a knot in my stomach. I started sleeping through the night. I ate meals without checking my phone every 5 minutes. One afternoon, as I boxed up the last of my things, she stood in the doorway and said quietly, "You're really doing this?" I looked at her and replied, "I already did." And for the first time, I meant it. Still, even as the legal ties were severed, I knew there was one final step left, not revenge, not closure from her, but learning how to live without carrying someone else's weight for the first time in my life. Life didn't magically become perfect once the divorce was finalized. There was no sudden glow-up montage or dramatic sense of triumph. What I felt instead was something quieter, and much more unfamiliar: peace. Real peace. The kind that settles in slowly, without demanding anything from you. I moved into a smaller place, sparsely furnished at first, but it felt lighter the moment I shut the door behind me. No tension in the air. No waiting for the next accusation or disappointment. The first few weeks were strange. I'd wake up early out of habit, bracing myself for stress that never came. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking, did I forget to pay something? Did I miss a shift? Then I'd remember, there was nothing left to fix. No one left to rescue. For the first time in years, my energy belonged to me. I stopped checking her social media. Not out of discipline, but because one day I realized I didn't care anymore. The anger faded. So did the questions. I didn't need to know whether she regretted it, whether she struggled, or whether she blamed me. That chapter had closed the moment I chose myself over being needed. I started taking better care of my body. Sleeping normally. Eating real meals. Saying no to overtime just because I could. Friends commented that I seemed different, calmer, more present. One of them said, "You look like someone who finally put something heavy down." That hit harder than anything else. Looking back now, I understand the lesson I couldn't see back then. Sacrifice without boundaries isn't love. It's self-erasure. Loyalty means nothing to someone who benefits from your exhaustion. And being dependable doesn't mean accepting betrayal just because you've always been the strong one. I don't hate her. I don't wish her well or ill. She's just someone who no longer has access to my time, my effort, or my future. Walking away wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was the most powerful decision I've ever made. Because the moment I stopped carrying someone who didn't value me was the moment my life finally became my own.